Whenever I see progressives confronted with the realities of Venezuelan socialism, they insist that what they really want is Nordic-style socialism.
If your rebuttal involves referencing the Soviet Union, Venezuela, or Cuba, you have no rebuttal, because that's a straw man.
We're not talking about that type of socialism. We're talking about the kind that's practiced in Iceland, the kind that's practiced in Denmark, Sweden, Norway. I was just in Norway. Everyone is happier in Norway.
A few months ago, I made a video titled, Who's Afraid of Democratic Socialism?, where I addressed this talking point. I accused American progressives of, among other things, cherry-picking the qualities they like about the Nordic countries, and assuming that we can emulate those things here. The notion that we can and should replicate the policies of these nations has become mainstream on the left and in the Democratic Party, and you can thank Bernie Sanders for that shift in the Overton window.
I can hear the Republican attack ad right now. He wants America to look more like Scandinavia.
That's right. That's right. And what's wrong with that?
One of the problems I have with these people is that they're dishonest about what they're offering. They don't really want to adopt the Nordic model in its totality. It is one thing to argue that we should construct a large and expensive welfare state, and that we should pay for it with higher taxes, as they do in Scandinavia. I don't agree with that position, but at least I respect it, and it's actually tenable. That's not what American progressives are advocating for, though. They are pushing for a Nordic-style welfare state with American levels of taxation, which simply won't work. If anything, our friends on the left want to further cut taxes on the middle class.
I've often said on this show that I've never met a middle-class tax cut I don't like.
Now, it's true that, with the exception of Norway, Scandinavian countries have a higher top marginal tax rate than does the United States. They also have much higher taxes on the middle class. According to the Tax Foundation, Scandinavian income taxes raise a lot of revenue because they are actually rather flat. In other words, they tax most people at these high rates, not just high-income taxpayers. The top marginal tax rate of 60% in Denmark applies to all income over 1.2 times the average income in Denmark. From the American perspective, this means that all income over $60,000, 1.2 times the average income of about $50,000 in the United States, would be taxed at 60%. Sweden and Norway have similarly flat income tax systems. Sweden's top marginal tax rate of 56.9% applies to all income over 1.5 times the average income in Sweden. Norway's top marginal tax rate of 39% applies to all income over 1.6 times the average Norwegian income. Compare this to the United States. The top marginal tax rate of 46.8%, state average and federal combined rates, kicks in at 8.5 times the average U.S. income, around $400,000. Comparatively, few taxpayers in the United States face a top marginal rate. These are all 2015 numbers, by the way. They are likely somewhat outdated. The United States actually has a much more progressive tax system, in that the wealthy have a much higher share of the total tax burden. If the left wants to build a Nordic welfare state here, then we're going to have to pay for it like they do over there. Of course, the cherry picking doesn't stop with the rates. Presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren has proposed a wealth tax.
So the way that this is written is to say, first of all, going to tax all your assets wherever located around the globe. So if you were planning to move them to Switzerland or some island, doesn't make any difference. They are all going to be taxed. And the second part of it is we're going to build right into the administration of this tax that it has a very high rate of monitoring, of auditing the rich people on the ultra-millionaire tax. So we're going to be out there counting them and watching them. And the third part of it is, once you identify these assets, it's actually not that complicated and hard, because unlike some other places that tried to build this one isn't going to have a bunch of exceptions. This one says all your assets, wherever located, and we're going to keep counting. And you're going to have to pay, if you have more than $50 million in assets, this is the ultra rich, you're going to have to pay 2% a year of that amount over $50 million.
Exactly where in the Constitution she finds the justification for this, I don't know, but that's beside the point. Denmark had a wealth tax, then they scrapped it in 1995. Finland scrapped theirs in 2006, as did Iceland. Sweden got rid of theirs in 2007. Now, I will grant you that one of the reasons these nations did this is because the wealthy would just move their assets around to another country, something that probably wouldn't be as easy for someone living in the United States. Senator Warren said that the IRS would also crack down on people who tried to do this, but she really hasn't given any details. As The Economist points out,
unfortunately, the proposed new schemes are poorly designed. Ms. Warren's takes aim at wealth inequality, which has also risen dramatically. It is legitimate to tax wealth, but Ms. Warren's levy would be crude, distorting, and hard to enforce. A business owner making nominal annual returns of around 5% would see much of that wiped out before accounting for existing taxes on capital. That prospect would squash investment and enterprise. Meanwhile, bureaucrats would repeatedly find themselves having to value billionaires' art collections and other illiquid assets. 8 rich countries have scrapped their wealth taxes since 1990, often amid concerns about their economic and administrative costs. In 2017, only 4 levied them.
I just did my own taxes, and as usual, it was a total pain in the ass. And for what it's worth, the IRS collects far more information about you, and far more intimate information, for that matter, than do our intelligence agencies, which progressives are constantly bitching about. I'd hate to see that agency probing even further into the lives of citizens, but that's another discussion for another time. Going back to healthcare, Bernie Sanders and company claimed that by implementing a single-payer healthcare system, we would merely be catching up to the rest of the industrialized world. Again, this really isn't true, and most nations with single-payer healthcare don't outlaw private insurance, which Sanders effectively seeks to do.
Sanders in an interview did not mince words. The only role for private insurance in the system he envisioned would be cosmetic surgery if you want to get your nose fixed.
Damn, man, that dude's not playing.
For what it's worth, the bill that Sanders is proposing is far more generous than any other single-payer nation has put forward, something that progressives have unironically pointed out with glee.
Bernie's Medicare for All plan is better than what Canada currently has. So in Canada, we have our family doctors covered, hospital care covered, but we don't have dental care and we don't have pharmacare. So certain provinces do have their own plan, so it varies by province. But for example, in my province, we don't have pharmacare or dental care. And in Bernie's plan, you do have all of that. So if you were able to pass, Medicare for All in the future, you will have a better healthcare system than Canada currently has.
The point of this video is to reiterate one of the main themes of this channel. Progressives have no appreciation for trade-offs. The populist left is committed to their unified theory of everything. That the only reason we don't live in Nordic-style utopias that they imagine is because billionaires and corporations have bought politicians in order to prevent that from happening. Of course, reality is much more complicated than that. There is nothing inherently wrong with looking to other nations for ideas, but you have to appreciate that even the best systems have their drawbacks, and more importantly, they have their costs. The left does have a solution for their expensive agenda, though, and it's called modern monetary theory.
There are people who know about modern monetary theory, MMT, a school of economics, and they say, well, listen, the real response to that is you tell Jake Tapper, hey, dipshit, we control our own currency. So, of course, we could pay for it. By definition, we can pay for it, and it doesn't even need to be deficit neutral. Bottom line is, if you go back and look at the $1 trillion coin debate, this was when there was the debt ceiling standoff, and then one of the ideas that was proposed was we could just mint $1 trillion coin, and then the deficit ceiling is taken care of because we control our own currency. So if you mint $1 trillion coin, that solves the problem. You don't even need to worry about the debt ceiling.
You heard him right. He thinks that we can just print money to pay for all the things that we want the government to do. In other words, Kyle and those like him want to adopt the Venezuelan model of financing a welfare state, not the Nordic model. If we do that, I expect we'll get Venezuelan-like results.